I'm here with Chris Geary at LFCC Winter, and I'm just going to ask a few questions about Aces Weekly and International Aces. First of all, I wanted to say I love the idea of featuring like World War I pilots and stuff like that. It's not something I've seen in a lot of comics, and I just wondered where you got the idea from and what made you want to sort of cover that sort of thing.
Well, basically, quite a few years ago now, I did some storyboard work for a film about the Red Baron. And ultimately the film never went anywhere, but in talking with other people I worked on that with, we then decided that as the centenary was coming up for this year, and we liked that period and it wasn't covered much by anything, that we would actually focus on that. We were going to do First World War, but because planes weren't featured that much in a lot of literature about the First World War, we decided to focus on that because there's not much around.
Yeah, so I assume it took quite a lot of research to get all the planes right, the different types, and what everyone would have worn. Is that something you were interested in before, or was that all new to you?
In terms of flying and planes, yes, I've always had a fascination with that, from the Wright brothers up to modern day. Like my favourite plane is like the Blackbird, the stealth plane, and but even like to do with space flight and things like that. So always had an interest in that, but then in researching this becomes even more fascinating than you originally think. When you see how the technology of planes have changed over the short years of the war and things like that. So it becomes those things of where, yes, an initial interest is then sort of sparks into a complete sort of like obsession.
Yeah, I suppose it just gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly, yeah.
I guess there must be a lot of stories you could cover. Do you have any sort of idea how much you want to do? Do you want to do more than you have done about it?
Yeah, because the thing that we found is that, because I had a publishing partner in this as well, that a lot of stories you research and then they become deeper and more fascinating than you initially thought of, so you have to sort of edit out certain bits. And what we found is that because the criteria that we picked for this series was the pilots with the most victories from each of the countries, so therefore there were a lot of pioneering pilots that were around earlier in the war, that were the people that sort of designed planes better, or people that stuck machine guns on the planes and stuff like that we couldn't really feature because they weren't in that criteria of being the highest scoring ace. So we were thinking of an idea of doing a pioneers sort of aviation sort of series linked in with the war as well, and again trying to do different things that sort of like tied up, things like that. So
that sounds good.
Yeah, it's always a possibility. Obviously if the sales go well and things like that, then we'll do that.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to talk about. You've recently released ink shorts, haven't you? Via Comics on.
Ink shorts, yes.
Yeah. And you've sort of continued. Is it Cora?
Yes.
I've only seen it written down.
Okay, yes, yeah.
No, but it's Cora. So you've sort of continued that story now. Can you sort of tell us a bit about that? What led you to continue it? What made you want to carry on?
Okay, well, Cora originally was written, it seems like the dark ages now, but it was like in the mid-90s, strangely enough. And that's where the initial idea came from. And it's like something that I've explored as an idea every so often. And then a few years ago, for a small press comic called Omnivistascope, the editor asked me if I had like a 5 or 6 page story. So strangely enough, I was reworking on that story at the time, so I decided to do a short then. And then since then I've coloured it and was going to put it in ink shorts. And then a few months ago, David Lloyd asked me if I had anything that could be as a quick backup strip in Aces Weekly. So I submitted the little short page story of Cora, and he said, fine, would you like to do any more of that? So it had this sort of a storyline already in place, and I was thinking of doing it soon anyway. So it's just one of those natural things of timing that just like led to me doing it, like redesigning it all for Aces Weekly. So I ended up having to essentially scrap almost half the story because of the format of Aces Weekly is different to how I originally wanted to do it. So I had to change things around, which is not a problem.
Yeah, was that hard to do? Did you feel attached to it and not want to change it, or were you quite?
Sort of, because what initially I'd done as a short story was a weird compression of a couple of scenes that were in the longer story. And then when I was then thinking about doing it for Aces Weekly, I was going to start it again from scratch, but go back to my original version, which these two scenes would then be quite a few pages apart. But now, then David wanted to release that as it was, so I then couldn't go back and start again. So I essentially had to rejig the beginning of the story, so it now flowed more from this new origin, and sort of take it from that, which also led to me changing the story further on down the line, because it actually freed me up into thinking I'm not tied to the story as it has been for quite a few years. I can do it however I want. Because it has to be done in short installments. So again, that changes how you think about story. So almost
Yeah.
became making it up as I went along in some
Yeah, I
respects.
guess that's quite freeing in a way.
Yes,
Quite-
exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. We, like I said, we talked to David Lloyd last time we were here. He's felt quite passionately about the importance of comics and how they are or should be accessible to everyone, because they've kind of been pigeonholed as being a bit geeky or nerdy.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have any sort of thoughts on that? He sort of felt it should be sort of appreciated by more people.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that since I was a child. Is that I've always been passionate as it being a communications medium, and therefore any story can be told. And that's the good thing about comics, is that you're not really restricted in terms of style or content or anything like that. But it has become this sort of weird sort of ghetto where it has been sort of like, for a long time it was mainly sort of superheroes is what people thought comics were about, or they were for children and things like that. And even though there's been such good work out there like Mouse or stuff by Will Eisner that have like shown the potential of the medium, it still seems to be that barrier that's around it. And it is just a case of potentially that maybe going digital in the future could help distribute them in a bit more in a flexible way, because the problem is in recent years that you have to go into a comic shop to buy comics, and if you have no intention of going into a comic shop, then you'll never stumble across them. Whereas in the olden days you had them on lots of newsstands and news agents and stuff like that, so people would come across them naturally. So hopefully digital that might
that might sort of
if there was a digital newsstand, I know there is on the iPad, but if there was a version of that where a lot of comics could be more accessible, as opposed to people having to go to Comixology, so therefore you have to know about that app. The same way it's like a comic shop, exactly the same thing. But if you can advertise in a more flexible way, then that hopefully might generate interest and stuff like that.
So there's a lot to be done in the future then.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's all my questions.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well.